You know, almost everything you probably think you know about Charles Darwin is actually, well, it's wrong.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't even discover that species change over time.
Yeah.
His own grandfather, Erasmus, he was writing poetry about that decades earlier.
Right, yeah.
And he definitely absolutely never said that humans descended from monkeys. In fact, he was like incredibly careful to avoid saying anything of the sort because he knew exactly how explosive it would be.
It's really one of the great historical misunderstandings, isn't it? I mean, what Darwin actually did was far stranger. And honestly, it was much more dangerous to the worldview of his time
Oh, absolutely.
because he essentially removed foresight from the explanation of complexity. Like before him, if you looked at a really complex biological design, you just naturally assumed there was a designer.
He had to,
Right. But after him, all you needed was time, variation, and just the quiet, brutal arithmetic of who manages to leave offspring.
And that quiet arithmetic is exactly our mission for our deep dive today. So we're exploring a really thought-provoking manuscript. It's titled The Secret of Our Origins, Darwin and the Evolution of Life. And it's by the philosopher Boris Kriger.
It's a fascinating read.
It really is. We are going to unpack the true genius of Darwin's engine and explore Boris Kriger's highly original frameworks that just completely redefine how we measure biological complexity.
It completely flips a script.
And then we'll reveal how Darwin's 19th century mechanism is actually running, quite literally, on modern silicon right now.
You know, the central realization to start with here is that Darwin didn't actually discover a biological law.
Okay.
What he discovered was a logical specification. You can kind of think of it as a blueprint with 3 empty slots. And today, we're going to see exactly what happens when you pour something other than biological matter into those slots.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to really understand what Darwin actually accomplished, you have to understand the intellectual giant he was trying to defeat, right?
Yes.
And that takes us all the way back to 1802 to this English clergyman named William Paley.
Right, Paley's famous watch on the heath argument.
Yeah.
Which is, often treated as a bit of a period curiosity today, maybe a bit naive. But it was actually an incredibly robust piece of reasoning for its time.
Oh, for sure.
Paley argued that if you are walking across a wild, uncultivated heath and you kick a stone, well, you learn nothing.
Right, it's just a rock.
Exactly. That stone might have been there forever, but if you look down and you find a pocket watch, you instantly notice its specific functional arrangement.
Right, like it has glass protecting the face, it has these tiny springs to store tension, a chain to transfer power, cogs to regulate the movement.
Yes.
Every single part is placed exactly where it needs to be to fulfill a specific purpose, which is telling time.
And that specific arrangement implies a watchmaker. I mean, the watch couldn't just assemble itself by the random blowing of the wind.
No, of course not.
Yeah. So when Paley looked at the natural world, he saw watches everywhere. He looked at the lens of an eye, which focuses light perfectly onto a retina, or even the specific barbed shape of a woodpecker's tongue that it uses to extract insects.
Just perfect functional fit.
Right, functional fit. And to Paley, a machine mathematically implies a mind that designed it.
Which makes sense. I mean, it really set the standard for how we understood the world back then.
Totally.
But Darwin finally solved this watch problem, not by looking at biology, which is the crazy part, but by reading a rather bleak economic pamphlet.
Yeah, he picked up a book by Thomas Malthus.
Right, who was writing about human populations and scarcity.
Exactly. Malthus pointed out this terrifying mathematical reality. Human populations multiply exponentially, 2, 4, 8, 16.
Right.
But agricultural food production, that only increases by addition, like 1, 2, 3, 4.
Which means someone's starving.
Exactly. There is always a gap between the number of mouths to feed and the food available, which means there is this perpetual, unavoidable struggle for existence. And Darwin basically took that permanent universal pressure of scarcity and built his engine out of it.
And the brilliance of that engine is just how terrifyingly simple it is. I mean, it really only requires 3 things. First, variation, meaning individuals in population are not identical.
Right.
Second, inheritance. Offspring generally resemble their parents. And third, differential reproduction, which is basically the filter.
Yeah.
Some variants leave more descendants simply because the world doesn't have room or resources for everyone. And that's it. That is the entire mechanism that builds the watch.
But, and this is the key, look closely at those three components: variation, inheritance, differential reproduction.
Uh-huh.
Nowhere in those three slots does it mention flesh.
Wow, yeah.
It doesn't mention cells or proteins or blood or DNA. It is entirely abstract.
It's like a recipe that doesn't specify any ingredients.
Yeah.
It just tells you the steps.
Right.
Like something varies, something is copied, and something fails to be copied.
Exactly.
Flesh and blood was just the first place we happened to notice this engine running.
Right. Each of those components is a placeholder defined purely by its role, not its substance. But that abstraction brought its own terrifying vulnerability for Darwin.
Because what if the ingredients don't work?
Exactly. If the recipe doesn't specify ingredients, what happens when one of those abstract steps completely fails to work chemically in the real world?
Which leads us directly to Darwin's greatest terror.
Yeah.
Because he knew the machine was essentially missing a floor.
Yeah. In 1867, there was this Scottish engineer named Fleming Jenkin, and he wrote a review that practically dismantled Darwin's machine.
Just took it apart.
He audited the theory the way an engineer audits an electrical circuit. You see, at the time, the prevailing scientific belief regarding inheritance was blending inheritance.
Which is the idea that traits mix together like paint, right? Like if you mix red paint and white paint, you get pink.
Exactly. And Jenkin pointed out the fatal math of mixing paint. He said, suppose a rare, favorable variation appears in nature. Let's say, I don't know, a slightly faster deer.
Okay.
It mates with a normal, average speed deer. Under the theory of blending inheritance, the offspring has exactly half the improvement. It's only half as fast as the exceptional parent.
And then the next generation has a quarter of the improvement.
Right. Then an eighth. Within just a handful of generations, the trait is diluted into absolute invisibility.
He used this really haunting analogy, didn't he? The shipwrecked European.
Yes, he proposed a thought experiment where an exceptional European sailor possessing all the supposed superior traits of a 19th century gentleman is shipwrecked on an island of locals.
Okay.
He might become a king, he might have many children, but he can't turn the island white. His traits get halved in every generation until he is nothing but a rumor. The mathematical reality was that excellence just drains away. It dissolves back into the average much faster than the environment can ever select for it.
Which is just an unanswerable mathematical objection. And Darwin panicked. I mean, he spent years trying to patch the hole, and he even retreated to endorsing older, totally discredited ideas just to make the math work.
Yeah, he retreated to Lamarckian inheritance.
Right.
Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was an earlier thinker who believed acquired traits could be passed down. You know, the classic example is a blacksmith who builds huge arm muscles swinging a hammer and then passes those big muscles directly to his children.
Which we know isn't true.
Right. But Darwin was so desperate, he invented a hypothetical system called pangenesis. He imagined that cells all over the body shed tiny particles called gemmules that captured the body's life experiences and then
travel to the reproductive organs to be passed on.
Exactly. It was a completely flawed, desperate attempt to stop the traits from diluting.
But the irony here is almost painful, because the actual solution to Jenkins' critique was already in print.
It was.
It was just sitting in an obscure provincial journal, written by a trained physicist working as a friar in a Moravian monastery garden.
Gregor Mendel.
Yes. Gregor Mendel and his 28,000 pea plants.
Mendel proved that inheritance isn't like mixing paint at all. It's carried by discrete, unshuffleable particles.
Which we call genes today.
Right. And because they are discrete units, a trait isn't diluted when it gets passed on. It just gets masked.
It sits there.
Exactly. It sits there, hidden, waiting to reappear entirely intact in a future generation.
It's like shuffling a deck of cards rather than mixing a can of paint.
That's a great way to put it.
The Jack of Spades doesn't wear down into like a gray mush just because it gets shuffled into the deck.
Yeah.
It emerges on the next deal looking exactly the same.
And the timeline of this is just staggering. Darwin published his theory in 1859. Mendel published the missing floor to the theory, particulate inheritance, in 1866.
So close.
But it took 59 years for the scientific community to actually connect those two halves.
That is wild.
They were just sitting in the same libraries for decades. But, more importantly for our discussion today, this gap proves that Darwin's mechanism was defined entirely by its role, not its chemistry.
Because it worked without it.
Yes. The theory of evolution survived for a century with a chemically empty slot, just waiting for us to discover DNA.
Okay, wait, so if the physical substance of the engine doesn't matter, does that mean the environment does all the creative work?
How do you mean?
Like, does the world just sculpt whatever it wants out of this raw, infinitely malleable material? Because here is where the author, Boris Kriger, introduces a groundbreaking original perspective that really, it flips the script on how we view evolution.
Yeah, Boris Kriger introduces a highly original concept here called pre-integrative rejection.
Okay.
And this falls under his broader theory of structural viability. So the standard textbook story of evolution assumes that variation is generated freely, and then the environment comes along and filters out the bad mutations by starving them or having a predator eat them.
Right, survival of the fittest.
But Boris Kriger argues that the first filter isn't the external environment at all. The very first filter is internal coherence.
So it's like trying to build a Lego house, but with pieces that are magnetically polarized to violently repel each other.
Yes, exactly.
The environment, let's say a strong gust of wind, never even gets a chance to blow the house down because the house simply refuses to assemble in the first place. It just fails on the living room floor.
And to ground that in biology, before a mutated animal ever faces a predator on the savanna, its newly mutated proteins have to fold correctly on a microscopic level.
Oh, wow.
Its cells have to divide without tearing their own membranes apart. The physical laws of chemistry act as a bouncer at the door, basically rejecting 99% of mutations before they even enter the room.
That makes so much sense.
In Boris Kriger's original work, he mathematically models that in any coherent system, there are no neutral parts. Everything must cooperate just to persist.
Therefore, the corridor of viable structures is actually incredibly narrow.
Yes. Selection isn't the master sculptor carving anything it wants from a block of infinite clay.
No.
Selection is merely the last stage. It's just picking from the very few designs that actually manage to hold together chemically and structurally.
And this explains a phenomenon you see everywhere in biology called convergence, right?
Yeah.
The idea that nature keeps inventing the exact same biological machine over and over again.
Exactly. The classic example is the camera eye.
Right.
An octopus and a human being share an ancestor that lived about 600 million years ago. And that ancestor was essentially a blind worm.
Just a little worm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yet both humans and octopuses evolved an incredibly complex camera-style eye, complete with a lens, a retina, and a fluid-filled chamber, completely independently on entirely different branches of the tree of life.
Or, there's the running joke in evolutionary biology, carcinization.
Oh, I love this one.
The fact that the crab body plant, the flat shell, the tucked tail, the sideways walk, it has evolved independently from non-crab ancestors at least 5 separate times. Everything keeps turning into a crab.
Mm-hmm.
And Boris Kriger's framework actually explains why. The solution belongs to the problem of physics, not to the family tree.
Exactly.
The ocean doesn't care what your DNA is. Hydrodynamics only allows certain shapes to move through water efficiently and survive a crushing environment.
Which, brings up a very tempting logical trap.
Okay, what's that?
If physics and structure restrict life to a narrow corridor, and certain solutions are just baked into the universe waiting to be found, doesn't that imply we are climbing a ladder of progress?
Oh, right. Because the 19th century desperately wanted to believe that humans were the ultimate physical solution standing at the very top of a biological ladder.
Naturally.
But if you try to measure complexity on a single ladder, say by looking at the raw size of our genetic code, you run straight into a humiliating problem known as the onion test.
Yes, the onion test.
Why does a common onion have 5 times more DNA than a human being? Certain amoebas have 200 times more. If genetic size equals biological sophistication, we are severely losing to a vegetable.
And this is where Boris Kriger offers his second major original contribution in this book.
Okay.
It's called the GEKS index. It stands for Gelman, Aspessit, Kriger, and Shannon. Boris Kriger argues that biological complexity cannot be ranked on a single ladder.
It just doesn't work.
Right. That model is scientifically broken. Complexity isn't a single substance. It's a multidimensional profile.
So Boris Kriger lays out 4 specific dimensions for the GEKS index. Can you break those down?
Yeah, sure. First is informational variety, basically how much raw genetic diversity or data is there.
Okay.
Second is organized structure. How much of that variety is actual pattern rather than just repetitive noise?
Got it.
Third is accumulated evolutionary innovation. So how much genuinely new historical architecture does the lineage have? And fourth is functional realization. What does the organism actually do with the tools it has?
Okay, so how does this play out in practice?
Well, Boris Kriger gives a brilliant specific example to illustrate why this multidimensional approach is necessary. Take a flowering plant and a crow.
Okay, a plant and a bird.
On a single ladder, you wouldn't really know where to put them. But on the GEKS index, they might achieve the exact same total complexity score just by entirely different routes.
Really?
Yeah, the flowering plant scores incredibly high on informational variety and accumulated innovation. Plants are massive biochemical factories with enormous genomes, but it scores almost zero on functional realization. It doesn't move, it doesn't behave.
Meanwhile, the crow has a very compact, small genome because birds have to shed genetic weight for flight,
Right.
so it scores low on variety. But on functional realization, it scores off the charts. It uses tools, it plans for the future, it holds multi-generational grudges against specific human faces.
Exactly. Or consider a virus. A virus scores near zero on informational variety and organized structure. It is barely a handful of genes wrapped in a protein code.
Yeah.
But its functional realization is terrifyingly high because it hijacks the entire cellular machinery of a host. You humans, on the other hand, score high on functional realization and organized structure, but perhaps less on raw informational variety than the onion.
Which is humbling.
Boris Kriger proves that complexity is not a single ladder you climb. It's a vast, multidimensional space you explore.
So if complexity isn't a single biological ladder, and the mechanism that drives it is just a set of empty slots, doesn't that mean evolution could happen entirely outside of biology?
And that is the startling realization Boris Kriger points out about his own index.
Oh, wow.
3 of those 4 dimensions, variety, organized structure, and functional realization, do not require a biological lineage at all.
Not at all.
They are properties of information and relations, not properties of meat. Which brings us to the ultimate proof of Darwin's substrate independence.
Because Boris Kriger takes all this theory and points it straight at modern large language model, artificial intelligence.
Yes. If we audit an AI system using Darwin's 3 slots, the result is fascinating. Remember the slots:
Yeah.
variation, inheritance, and differential reproduction. In a trained large language model, there is no variation within a competing line. There is no reproduction, and there is no death. The 3 biological slots are completely empty.
Nothing dies. There are no offspring.
Yet, this system carries the entire accumulated cultural complexity of humanity. It is, as Boris Kriger powerfully puts it, the ape's software running on sand.
That's such a good line.
It has internalized the entire grammar and structure of the human species without inheriting a single component of Darwin's biological machinery.
The ape software running on sand. I mean, AI didn't just learn our dictionary definitions. It inherited our deeply embodied primate metaphors.
Exactly.
When an AI generates text, it talks about grasping an idea or having a heavy heart or seeing the big picture.
Right.
These are physical metaphors generated by a creature with grasping hands, a cardiovascular system, and binocular vision. The AI has no hands, no heart, and no eyes.
None of it.
It inherited our social deference, our politeness protocols, and our primate obsession with storytelling, all completely divorced from the physical survival pressures that forced us to create them.
It's wild to think about.
So if the AI is running our primate software, it must be inheriting our evolutionary flaws too, right? Like, is it going to have the digital equivalent of a bad lower back or an appendix just waiting to burst?
Well, that is a crucial distinction Boris Kriger makes. It does not have biological baggage because it has no biological history. Let's define what a biological flaw or a vestige actually is.
Okay.
A vestige is an evolutionary leftover that no longer serves its original purpose efficiently, but the animal is stuck with it.
Right, because evolution can't start over from a blank slate.
Right.
It has to modify what's already there, and every intermediate step has to keep the animal alive.
Exactly. Think of the recurrent laryngeal nerve.
Oh, right.
In a fish, this nerve goes straight from the brain, past a gill arch, to the gills. It's a short, straight line. But in a mammal, as the neck elongated over millions of years, that gill arch moved down into the chest to become part of the heart's plumbing. Evolution couldn't just cut the nerve and reroute it. The animal would die. So in a modern giraffe, that nerve leaves the brain, travels all the way down the long neck, loops under the aorta in the chest, and goes all the way back up the neck to the larynx.
That is absurd.
It is an absurd 15-foot detour just to travel a few inches.
AI doesn't have recurrent laryngeal nerves.
No, because it wasn't built by biological descent with modification. It doesn't have physical vestiges. Instead, its fossil record is the bias and distortion of the human texts it was trained on.
Right, the data.
It carries the prejudices, the historical blind spots, and the cultural sediment of the internet library it absorbed. It's a completely different kind of evolutionary baggage.
You know, it is incredible to sit back and marvel at how Boris Kriger's work completely shifts the worldview we started with.
Mm.
I mean, think back to William Paley walking on that wild heath in 1802.
Ah.
Paley thought the material, the brass of the cogs, and the pattern, the timekeeping, had to be created together in the exact same workshop by a designer. But what we now know is that the pattern can be lifted entirely out of the meat, out of the brass, and poured directly into silicon sand.
Absolutely.
You, listening to this right now, are carrying around an ancient grammar built by primates fighting for survival on the savanna, which is now being fluently spoken by microchips in a server farm.
And that leads to one final, somewhat haunting idea drawn from the source material. Because biological creatures evolve through the brutal filter of death over 4 billion years, our biology has learned a concept called graceful degradation.
Graceful degradation.
When we are injured or stressed, we fail slowly and adaptively. We limp, we compensate, we heal. Engineered AI systems, on the other hand, are built by humans with a foresight of maybe 2 or 3 steps.
Right.
Because of that lack of deep evolutionary testing, they tend to fail sharply, bizarrely, and abruptly.
They don't limp, they just break.
Exactly. Furthermore, because an AI doesn't have a biological body that actually dies to make room for a new, updated generation, it suffers from a totally different kind of decay, which is staleness.
Staleness.
It holds fixed knowledge in a continuously changing world. So the question for you to ponder today is this. What happens to a mind with no ancestors, that can never physically die, but is doomed to watch the world outgrow the snapshot of its own training?
Wow. That is a wild thought to leave on. A mind that never dies, but just watches the world pass it by. Thank you so much for joining us on this intellectual journey today. We love taking these deep dives with you, and we can't wait to unpack the next one. Until then, keep questioning the world around you.